Well, here we are out with a couple of blondes.
Yeah. Hey, it's good to see you again. It's been a long time.
I always get a kick out of coming out here. They treat you right over here. There's one place they treat you right. You know, I leave the club. I close this week at a club in New York. But I'll be back next Monday.
You just close
September 9th.
Lock it up completely?
I lock the whole thing up for a week. Now I'll come back next Monday night, September 9th, and tell my jokes again at Dangerfield. But it's always a kick to come out here.
Yeah.
I love it out here. You know, I like to go to Vegas, too, you know.
Do you?
I'm going to Vegas for a couple of days. I always go over there. You meet so many wonderful, wonderful people in Vegas.
Uh-huh.
You have no idea.
Can you tell us about a few of them?
Well, last time I was there, I met a lovely girl.
Uh-huh.
Oh, a lovely girl. Valerie Dubois.
Valerie Dubois.
Oh, a lovely girl. Valerie Dubois. In fact, she told me to call her VD for short. Wonderful people out in Vegas.
Yeah,
Really nice. Oh, Vegas really swings. They got the gambling there, the big hotels and nightclubs. Oh, there's what big nightclubs they got there.
Yeah.
Something isn't really so different than the places I worked when I broke in. You know, the tough places.
You work in the little joints,
right?
right?
I work tough place. You know, places like Rosario's Rocket Room. You know.
Rosario's Rocket Room. Tough.
Dominic's Atomic Bar and Grill. Oh, that's another one. Sure. Oh, Dominic, he was tough. Ooh,
yeah,
tough Dominic.
Tough owner.
During the show, he used to yell at the acts all the time.
Yeah.
One night a guy was singing, "Why was I born?" He yelled out, "Not to sing," you know.
That's a real heckler, Dominic. Bad news, yeah.
Tell you, show business, you got to get the breaks. You got to get the breaks, Johnny.
I would guess so, yeah.
I never got the breaks, never.
Really?
As a kid, I never got the breaks either, never.
This has been following you all your life, you mean?
I was rough when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was a kid the first time I had my picture taken. The pony threw me. Another one I should have.
You got to try him out of town, right? You can't bring him in.
Take him on a road to you. Take him on a road. You got to break him in. So you get the feeling you wasted your whole life. I don't know. It's not easy. I got no respect the day I was born.
Really?
No respect. The doctor picked me up and smacked me. I found out the nurse. She got a few in too.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Wasdin Wednesday, August the 16th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have My Take, No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, RFK Jr., Fox News, Matt Gaetz, Newsmax, Vivek-Ramaswamy, and SEAL Team 6. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
The recognition of the insuperable limits to his knowledge ought indeed to teach the student of society a lesson of humility, which should guard him against becoming an accomplice in men's fatal striving to control society, a striving which makes him not only a tyrant over his fellows, but which may well make him the destroyer of a civilization which no brain has designed, but which has grown from the free efforts of millions of individuals. F.A. Hayek. Tyranny and destruction await the civilization which has given control over itself to that which lacks the knowledge to control it, and yet does not know that it lacks such. Freedom and prosperity await the civilization which unleashes the knowledge and effort embedded in human action.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. From The Virtue of Selfishness. Quote, observe also that moral neutrality necessitates a progressive sympathy for vice and a progressive antagonism for virtue. If I refuse to acknowledge evil, I will find it dangerous to acknowledge good. To me, a person of virtue would be a threat that could topple all of my evasions, particularly when an issue of justice is involved, which demands that I take sides. It is then that such formulas as, nobody is ever fully right or fully wrong, and who am I to judge, take their lethal effect. If I begin by saying, there's some good in the worst of us, then I will end up saying, it's the best of us who make life difficult. Why don't they just keep silent? Who are they to judge? Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Spy mania. In totalitaria, this vicious circle of vituperation reaches its fullest flowering. Drowned in a rain of suspicion, the citizen of totalitaria suffers from terrible delusion of persecution, spy-anoia, the spy mania. He is continually on the alert, watching his fellow men. His good neighbor may at any moment become a saboteur or a traitor. The citizen of totalitaria hardly ever looks for confusion or flaws in his own soul, but projects them onto scapegoats until he himself finally becomes the victim of someone else's spy-anoia. Every citizen is constantly trying to search out everyone else's innermost thoughts, because one's own hidden thoughts are projected on one's neighbors. Thinking in itself becomes the enemy. The great fear of the inner thoughts of our fellow men is related to the general process of paranoid reevaluation of the world as a result of fear and totalitarian thinking. In the denial of human loyalty and in the constant delusion of treason and sabotage are expressed the whole infantile mythology of totalitaria and its repudiation of mature human relationships. Through interrogation, character assassination, humiliation, mental terror, and demoralization, such as happens in individual and collective brainwashing, men can be so utterly demoralized that he accepts any political system. He is nothing anymore. Why should he oppose matters? In totalitaria, there is no open policy, no free discussion, no honest difference of opinion. There is only intrigue and denunciation, with their frightening action on the masses. The strategy of wild accusation is used not only against totalitarian citizenry, but also against the rest of the world. Totalitaria needs the images of outside enemies, imaginary cruel monsters who spread plague and disease, to justify its own internal troubles. The remnants of the individual citizen's conscience are calmed and held in check by a paranoid attack on the rest of the world. The enemy is poisoning our food, throwing beetles and bacteria into our crops. The myth of an imaginary world conspiracy aims at bringing the fearful citizens of totalitaria into a concerted defense against non-existent dangers. It conceals, at the same time, internal failures leading to diminishing crops and lack of food. Projecting blame onto others reinforces each citizen's sense of participation in the totalitarian community and stills the nagging internal voice demanding that he act as a self-responsible individual. The myth of external plotting also increases the individual citizen's feeling of dependence and immaturity. Now only his dictatorial leader can protect him from the evil world outside, a world which is described to him as a vast zoo inhabited by atomic dragons and hydrogen monsters.
And that was Spy Mania from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart-Varney's My Take.
For 40 years, from 1980 to 2020, China was the marvel of the world. It became the workshop of the world, a stellar performer where hundreds of millions were lifted out of abject poverty. That was the Communist Party's mantra, its deal. Leave us in power and we'll make you prosperous. That was the deal. It worked. But now, it's not working. And you have to wonder what happens to the deal. The pandemic was the pivot. A long and near total lockdown was imposed. It hit the economy and damaged the party's image. When the lockdown ended, the economy didn't return to pre-COVID growth. In fact, the property crisis got worse. And unemployment hit 20% for young people. Foreign companies started to leave after Taiwan was threatened and Hong Kong overrun. As of now, China's economy is in a slump, and it's getting worse. This is not an easy situation for China to deal with. It is a brittle dictatorship. It can't tolerate political opposition. That means new ideas outside communist orthodoxy cannot be conceded. It's a top-down government, not geared to the people who are getting hurt, the people whose prosperity is vital to the Communist Party. But don't celebrate. Bad news for a rival is not necessarily good news for us. We have to deal with China's decline, and dictators in a corner are dangerous. They can play the nationalist card in a strike at foreigners. Yes, times do change. China has gone from workshop of the world to dangerous threat to the world economy. Second hour of Varney, just getting started.
So that was Stuart-Varney. The one thing that he missed, and he kept referring to China as communist, and although it's called Communist China and they refer to themselves as communist, they are not how they refer to themselves. They are what they are, and they're fascist. They used to be communist. Then the Soviet Union fell apart. And when the Soviet Union fell apart, China, everybody was alarmed by it. Everybody was just shocked. Nobody saw it coming. And then China decided that if they don't change and quit being hardline communist, they're going to end up the same way. They're going to end up falling apart just like the former Soviet Union. So that's when they decided, okay, here's the deal. Keep us in power and we will let you be prosperous. You can have businesses. You can have and own businesses, and you can be prosperous. And but the businesses will be ultimately run by the government. You can do day-to-day operations, but the government is going to chart long-term strategies and etc. That's called fascism. That's what the Italians did. In the Italian government in World War II, there's a place in the government for business. There's somebody there to represent businesses. There's also somebody there to represent labor. And so business and the government worked together. And the idea was, again, that the government would ultimately dictate to businesses what it is that they were going to do and how they were going to do it. That's fascism. There are very few countries around the world that are not fascist today. Vietnam is fascist. The only one I can think of off the top of my head that's truly communist is North Korea. Everybody else, all other communist countries have gone fascist because they had to do so for their own survival. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr.
Chief, and I'll just say one other thing, Joe. That war's cost us $113 billion. That's the commitment so far. CDC's entire budget is $12 billion a year. FDA or EPA's entire budget is about $12 billion. We have 57% of our people in this country cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they need to, if there's an emergency. 25% of Americans are hungry now, are not getting enough food. I have a friend who is a commercial fisherman who spent his life, on the fisheries, had a business, put it together, but because it's a private business, because he was working a lot for other people, he doesn't have benefits. He now has a disability. His son-in-law runs the business, but can't support him. He has a disability, and he has been surviving on $280 worth of food stamps from the SNAP program. And that doesn't take you too far. But on March 1st, he got a robocall from the government saying, your food stamps have been cut by 90%. You're now getting $25 a month. Try feeding yourself on 90 cents a day in this country. 30 million Americans got that call. These are, and that same month, we bailed out, we printed $300 billion new dollars to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank. And we topped off the Ukraine war commitment to $113 billion. So we got lots of money for the military-industrial complex, lots of money for the bankers, the banksters. But we're starving Americans to death. Starving them. And because of all the inflation, we spent $16 trillion on the lockdown. We wasted, got nothing for it. $8 trillion on the Ukraine war. That's $24 trillion that they had to print to pay for nothing. That money, the way they're paying it back, they're not going to tell us they're raised taxes because you can't do that. It's a hidden tax called inflation, and it hits the poor and the middle class, and it has dismantled the middle class in this country. Well, my friends, food bills for basic foods like chicken, dairy, and eggs has increased 76% in 2 years to pay for the Iraq war, or the Ukraine war, the Iraq war, and the lockdowns. His food prices are going up. And now the government's telling him, while we have plenty of money for the military and the banks, we don't have it for Americans who are, hardworking people. And, something is not right. We're in a crisis in this country. We're in, and we need to start we need to start unraveling the empire. We have 800 bases abroad. We were told in 1992, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we were told we were going to get a peace dividend, that the military expenditure was going to go from $600 billion a year to $200 billion, and we were going to stop making billion-dollar stealth bombers that can't fly in the rain, and that we're going to take that money home and build schools with it, and build infrastructure, and give good health care in the inner cities. And then none of that happened. And today, instead of going down to $200 billion, it's gone up. The total military expenditure, if you include national security, is $1.3 billion. And it hasn't made us safer. It's made us worse off.
$1.3 trillion?
$1.3 trillion. If you include...
Yeah, I think you said billion.
No, $1.3 trillion. If you include national, this security apparatus and, all the stuff that you have to walk through at the airports... And if you include the $300 billion to the veterans, which you can't cut, the veterans are, we have 29 a day killing themselves. These wars are not good for our country or our kids, and we need to stop being an empire and instead come home, rebuild the middle class, and then project economic power, the way the Chinese do, who are eating our lunch because they know not to project military power, to project economic power. That's how you win the...
And that was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, little Fox News.
What one of the whistleblowers claimed is, in fact, that they were passed over by someone who was less qualified for a higher position. There was also, both of the whistleblowers claimed that after they came forward, they were both removed from the Hunter Biden case that they were investigating, and that they had both been on since 2018. That is crazy. That's unacceptable. That's why myself, Senator Grassley, Senator Johnson, Jim Jordan, and Jamie Comer is asked the special counsel to look into this more aggressively.
And that was Fox News about the IRS whistleblowers. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Matt Gaetz on the floor of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is quite similar to the prior one, but it wouldn't just strip the cash out of the bill. It would not require further security assistance to Ukraine. And I offer this amendment because the Biden administration is sleepwalking our great country into a world war. The American people did not sign up for this, and I believe Congress needs to have the solemnity to be able to stop this madness. I miss the days when Democrats used to be anti-war. And I listened with great interest as the ranking member, who I have great respect for, said the goal of this entire Ukraine-U.S. enterprise is to ensure that we are not going to war with Russia. And that is a bit odd to hear after several Democrats have taken to this floor and media outlets to suggest we are at war with Russia. It was, in fact, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, who came to this floor and said, we are at war with Russia. It was the gentleman from Massachusetts who just spoke on the prior amendment, who said functionally the same thing. I do not want to go to war with Russia, and I don't think the American people do either, and that does not make anyone pro-Putin. I would similarly observe that part of the funding assistance that we are providing to Ukraine has nothing to do with the military. In this country, we have cops, we have firemen, we have teachers who wonder whether or not their pension fund is going to be sufficient to cover their life for the service that they have given. And while that is a question in our country, it's no question in Ukraine, because the American taxpayer is underwriting all of the pensions for every single government official in Ukraine. And we don't do that for the people who put out our fires and protect our streets. Similarly, how can we continue to just send all this money when there's a lack of accountability? The Pentagon has to fess up that they have multi-billion-dollar accounting errors in this space. And when we had the Inspector General before our House Armed Services Committee, he could not testify that our country had followed our own requirements and our own laws regarding the end-use monitoring of equipment that we are sending into a combat zone. We have unfunded needs in our own military, and I support the NDAA. I'm grateful that we've done a lot of work, but even with this NDAA, in America, there will be hangars that are rusting out. In America, there will be platforms that need upgrades, and they will go wanting, while Ukraine seems to have an unlimited amount of support in this Congress that is unwarranted. 40% of our training aircraft can't even fly in this country because we don't have sufficient parts to be able to get it to them. This war will end anytime those folks in Europe want it to. But they keep buying the Russian gas, and they keep expecting all of us in America to subsidize Europe's defense while they provide some massive social welfare state. I'm not for it, and that's why I would encourage my colleagues to vote for my amendment, and I reserve.
And that was Matt Gaetz on the floor of the House. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Newsmax.
Ukrainian President Zelensky, President Biden meeting yesterday toward the tail end of the NATO summit in Lithuania. Biden, along with NATO leadership, reiterating that Ukraine will not be joining NATO.
Yeah, and for more on this, let's bring in General Blaine Holt to discuss more. General, just some breaking news this morning. So a senior Russian general was dismissed from his position after he accused the military's leadership of betraying his troops. What are you hearing about this?
Yeah, so this is much more to do with what happened when Prigozhin started to launch that mutiny. And we're actually seeing probably 13 flag officers still either in a suspended status or detained. And there's been a lot of shuffling. So we had a submarine commander, a captain was assassinated 2 days ago. This general's going to be the next one in a long list that they're looking at loyalty checks, and they're just going to get realigned. But this is exactly from the Prigozhin incident.
Yeah, interesting. We're getting reports yesterday from the New York Post that Prigozhin is dead. So we're trying to follow up, but that was everywhere yesterday as well. General, I want to get back to NATO. The president went to Finland. He'll apparently be back in Washington tonight. But he delivered a 20-minute speech yesterday in Lithuania before he left. Let's listen.
I mean that. Our commitment to Ukraine will not weaken. We will stand for liberty and freedom today, tomorrow, and for as long as it takes. We all want this war to end on just terms. Terms that uphold the basic principles of the United Nations Charter that we all signed up to. Sovereignty, territorial integrity. These are two pillars of peaceful relations among nations.
Watch this yesterday. I know you did as well. And what stood out to me is, and I was waiting for this the whole time. Don't forget, we're going to be 2 years into this war before you know it. Nothing about ending the war, nothing about peace, nothing about a ceasefire, nothing about how this war actually comes to an end without World War III. Did that surprise you on that stage, given that setting?
The first thing I said was, my, what a long way we are from where we said maybe just a small incursion might be okay, and we'll see how it goes, to fire, anger, brimstone, no diplomacy. We've got this track 2 team that's going to go in and try to talk to Lavrov. We're going to get all the players together because we know where this could end up going. And then just the sheer enmity and anger in the speech from a NATO summit where NATO made a nice overture to the Ukrainians, but it's really the G7 where the announcement was made that some security guarantees would come in. So we didn't see 32 nations sitting down and saying, okay, we're with you on security guarantees. We saw the G7 do that.
Yeah, General, just again, kind of your reaction to his speech and what the world sees. He made some blunders. He mixed up Zelensky's name. He did confuse Russia with Ukraine. I mean, you may recall just a month ago, he said that, Putin is losing the war in Iraq. So again, a lot of blunders. How does the world see him? Well,
the whole world looks on the United States by policy, action, deed, and then our representative as weak. Starts out with the Chinese summit, gets to Afghanistan, our greatest failure. Maybe Ukraine will eclipse that. We don't know yet. But what this does, Allison, is it emboldens those in Tehran. It emboldens those in Pyongyang and Beijing that this is our opportunity with the United States, and we may not get another one like this. And so I'm very concerned when we project this type of weakness. We can't even go to a dinner because we're tired.
Why can't President Zelensky wear a suit, by the way?
Why can't he? That's a great question.
I don't understand it. It's very bizarre to me, General. I don't know if you caught this during the Christopher Wray hearings yesterday. We were just talking about it. But this was, again, another one of these slip of the tongues. And he said, I can't talk about that multiple times. But he did say that the FBI was working with social media to take down posts that were negative about Zelensky and negative about the war in Ukraine. We've got this thing called the First Amendment here in this country. That, to me, just doesn't sound right.
Yeah, so even worse than that is the director took an oath to the Constitution, much the same as I took, to defend and protect our Constitution. That includes the First Amendment. And if you're coordinating with a foreign intelligence service of any kind, friendly or foe, for whatever reason, to suppress American speech, that to me is reprehensible and it's impeachable.
Interesting. Ukrainian presidents.
And that was Newsmax. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, little Vivek-Ramaswamy.
My parents came to this country with almost no money. I've gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies. And then people tell me, that's because you had privilege. They tell me white privilege. It's sort of weird. It's sort of it's kind of interesting.
Do you tell them?
I said, take the blindfold off, and now you have your answer. But the interesting answer is, actually what I do tell them, Tucker, is that I did have privilege. I didn't grow up in money, but I had two parents in the house, a mother and a father, with a focus on education and a faith in God. And you know what? That is the ultimate privilege. That if I'm going to enjoy that, every kid in this country ought to enjoy it too.
And that was Vivek-Ramaswamy. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, SEAL Team 6.
A BTR-60 PB and 3 trucks climbed up the hill to the station. 40 to 50 enemy soldiers poured out of the vehicles.
The Cuban officer swatted his men on the butts with a command stick. Attack! Erskine and his guys defended from the building. The enemy tried to outflank them while their BTR rolled up toward the front door and unleashed its 20mm cannon. The cannon blasted holes through the building's concrete like it was paper. One of the SEALs mounted a rifleman's assault weapon, RAW, a rocket-propelled grenade, onto the barrel of his Car-15 and pulled the rocket's safety. He aimed at the BTR and pulled his rifle trigger, the shot launching the rocket. 2 pounds of high explosives scored a direct hit on the BTR. Running out of ammunition in the face of overwhelming enemy firepower, Erskine and his SEALs set their explosives on the station and ran out the back door. They all thought they were dead, but the SEALs dashed across the meadow behind the station. With enemy closing in on their rear and both sides, Erskine calmly led his men in a leapfrog across a wide-open kill zone to the beach. He and half his men fell to the ground and fired at the enemy while the other half retreated. Then the retreating men dropped and fired at the enemy while Erskine and his shooters retreated. Bullets hailed down on them, one blowing Erskine's canteen off. Even though Erskine stood taller than 6 feet and weighed over 200 pounds, the shot knocked him to the ground. His squad members hit the dirt with him. They turned around and fired while the other squad retreated. As the guys continued their leapfrog, another round tore off Erskine's boot heel, sending him to the earth. The next time he got up and ran, a shot ricocheted off the ammo magazine on his belt, whacking him down again. Bullet number 4 was less kind. It ripped out a chunk of Erskine's right elbow, literally picking him up off the ground before slamming him into the dirt. He felt like his entire arm had been blown off. At the end of the meadow, the guys cut through a chain-link fence and crawled through. As Erskine counted his men, he realized a SEAL leader's worst nightmare. He was missing a man. Then the SEALs saw their missing teammate. Erskine and his men fired at the enemy as the radio man lugged the useless SATCOM radio across the field. "Drop the radio!" Erskine yelled. The radio man took off the radio and fired several rounds from his Sig Sauer 9mm sidearm into its cryptographic parts. Then he sprinted to join his buddies. They ran into a jungle of vegetation which hid them from the enemy. Even though they had killed some of the opposition, the SEALs were still outnumbered and had almost no ammunition left in their rifles. The men continued down a path and embraced Mother Ocean. Swimming straight out to sea would make them targets for the enemy. Erskine told the guys, "Ditch everything except your primary gear and swim parallel to the beach." They shed their rifles, backpacks, and nearly everything except pistols, pistol ammo, and E&E, escape and evasion kits. The SEALs swam parallel to the beach and found shelter in the cliffs, where an overhang concealed them from the enemy above. Friendly forces, not knowing they were still alive, blasted the bad guys near their position. The SEALs waited until the enemy had gone, then at 0300 swam out to sea. The SEALs floated in the ocean for 6 hours until a rescue plane saw them and called in a Navy ship to pick them up. The guys had been awake for 48 hours. After making sure he had all his men on the ship, Erskine passed out. He later recovered. The Navy awarded him the Silver Star Medal. In 1985, PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization terrorists, hijacked the cruise ship Achille Lauro and killed passenger Leon Klinghoffer. The terrorists sought shelter in Egypt, and when Egypt tried to sneak them out on a flight to the PLO headquarters in Tunisia, U.S. Navy fighter planes forced the plane down at the NATO base in Italy. SEAL Team 6 surrounded the terrorists on the runway, but the Italians stopped the SEALs from taking the plane down, demanding the 5 terrorists be turned over to them. After a brief showdown of SEALs versus Italian military and law enforcement, America agreed to turn over the terrorists to Italy. Unfortunately, the Italian government freed the leader, Abu Abbas, who was later captured in Iraq in 2003. Although the other terrorists went to jail, one was granted furlough and escaped. He was recaptured in Spain. Another terrorist disappeared from Italy while on parole. In 1989, SEAL Team 6 went to Panama to capture drug-dealing dictator Manuel Noriega. Noriega tried to hide out in a Catholic church, but with no way out of the country, he finally surrendered. Grenada, the Achille Lauro, and Panama were just 3 of the many operations SEAL Team 6 performed before I joined them. I took my first deployment with SEAL Team 2 in Machrihanish, Scotland. land of my mother's Kirkland ancestors who changed their name to Kirkman when they immigrated to the United States. The Scottish locals gave Smudge his nickname, taken from a famous English soccer athlete. We went with some of the guys to a tartan museum in Edinburgh where I found that my clan had come from the Highlands. Smudge teased me about finding my tartan. Wow, Howard's the Highlander. Yeah, there can be only one, I exclaimed. From Scotland, we trained alongside or interacted with a number of foreign special operation units. The British Special Boat Service, French Commando Hubert, German combat swimmers, Kampfschwimmer, Swedish Coastal Rangers, Kustjägarna, Norwegian Navy Ranger Command, Marine Jägerkommandoen, and others. During a harbor penetration exercise in Germany, I exchanged a case of my MREs with the rations of a Commando Hubert. His Commando Frogman unit had received much help in its creation from a World War II naval officer named Jacques-Yves Cousteau, who many came to know because of his TV series about the underwater world. The French rations included bottles of wine, cheese, and pâté. It amazed me how much they liked our freeze-dried food and Maxwell House coffee, just add water. When I returned to the barracks in Scotland, nearly everyone begged me for some of my wine, cheese, and pâté. For winter warfare training, I enjoyed over a month of fun with the Swedish Coastal Rangers, who perform long-range reconnaissance, sabotage, and assaults against enemies invading Sweden's coast. Although all young Swedish males must serve in the military for 1 year, some of them attempt to become Coastal Rangers. During the Cold War, Russia was their biggest threat. Bert, DJ, Steve, and I flew into Stockholm, the capital of Sweden. Historic churches, palaces, and castles mixed with green parks and waterways, making it a Venice of the North. Newer buildings blended ecological designs with high-tech and functionalism. Our hosts put us up in a wonderful hotel. One evening, as we returned from training, a short, skinny guy with spiky hair sat in the lobby, a long-legged woman sitting on each leg and one in his lap. Who is that? Two of us walked in closer to see who it was. Rod Stewart. There's hope for ugly guys everywhere. Become a rock star. In the morning, Bert drove us in a rental car to a ferry which shuttled us across the water so we could drive to the Coastal Rangers base, located in Berga at the Swedish Amphibious Corps, 1st Marine Regiment, Första Amphibieregimentet, AMF-1. Our first operations began in the Stockholm archipelago. With thousands of islands, it is one of the largest archipelagos in the Baltic Sea. My counterpart and I pushed off in a light two-man non-metallic folding kayak to search for Soviet submarines. I wore Varney sunglasses, named after the French Olympic gold medalist alpine ski racer, to shield my eyes from the sun. We landed on islands and searched them for any human activity. A cat-and-mouse game with the Soviets. Kayaking from island to island while carrying all our equipment was cold, hard work. After nearly a week, we loaded up with the Coastal Rangers on several charter buses. They brought bags of food on the bus. How far are we going again? I asked. 61 miles. The Coastal Rangers spoke good English. Wow, the food. Long trip. Only 61 miles? I could do that standing on my head. After 3 hours on the road, I said to another Coastal Ranger, I thought this was only going to be 61 miles. Yes, 61 miles. We've gone over 61 miles. Another Coastal Ranger smiled. 61 Swedish miles. I frowned. How far is that? Oh, about 380 American miles. You've got to be kidding me. I was glad I hadn't offered to go on any 4-mile runs with them. We passed a moose crossing sign before arriving in a small snowy town called Messlingen, next to Messlingen Lake, which was frozen over. Not found on any tourist maps, Messlingen is located 134 miles southwest of Östersund in central Sweden. The four of us checked into a wooden hotel with a sloping roof and overhanging eaves that looked like a chalet. Soon the Coastal Rangers took us for a dip in an ice hole. Although optional for us, everyone jumped into the nearly frozen water. We led by example, one of the stupid SEAL team kick-me-in-the-nuts-I-can-take-it traditions. Around our necks, we wore a cord with an ice pick dangling off it at chest level. The wooden handle was hand-sized, and the pick was an inch long. We had to jump in the ice hole, calm down, and request permission to get out of the water. Then we could reach forward, stab the ice with the pick, and pull ourselves out. On the first try, my vocal cords didn't even work. It was so cold, I just jumped out. During the third attempt, I calmed down and allowed my vocal cords enough time to function. My voice squeaked, "Request permission to get out." After exiting the water, getting warm became the priority. I thought back to winter warfare training in Alaska. Kevin and I became partners. He was a big, easygoing SEAL with dark hair and dark eyes. Trained as a hospital corpsman, he could handle most combat medical injuries until the injured could be transported to a hospital. Later, I heard he left the SEALs and became a doctor for the Navy, stationed in Spain. Kevin and I skied a deception trail, skiing past the area where we would pitch our tent. Then we do a fish hook back to our tent. This way we could hear someone coming before they reached us. We pitched a north-face two-man tent, put our rucksacks under the front of it, and piled snow outside the entrance so we could melt it later for drinking water, including what we'd use on our ski the next day. People actually dehydrate more in the winter because their lungs use a lot of moisture to heat up the air. We'd also add it to our freeze-dried meals. Inside the tent vestibule, we stripped off wet clothing down to our polypro underwear. We lit the MSR Whisper Light stove to make water. The heat it put out warmed up the tent fast. Kevin's feet were huge. His overboots wouldn't fit over his ski boots. While we waited for the snow to melt, Kevin would take off his boots and I'd put his toes under my armpits to prevent them from getting frostbite. Other guys looked forward to getting in their tents, but not me. Every night for 10 days, I warmed those damned ice cube toes under my armpits. Then I could jump into a sleeping bag on my ground pad. Fortunately, in Sweden, only 50 yards away from the ice hole, they had a sauna and beer. Also in Sweden, I experienced a snowcat for the first time, an armored personnel carrier on tracks that runs on the snow. Troops can shoot at the enemy from inside. They would attach a tow rope to the back of the snowcat and tow 10 or 12 soldiers on skis. Hooking a ski pole into the rope, I held onto the handle as it towed me. Many of the coastal rangers had grown up skiing. One of them was an Olympic athlete in the ski jump event. Of course, there were no ski slopes in South Georgia where I grew up. I'd fall down and the coastal rangers behind would try to maneuver around me. 4 of them ended up going down with me. After a while, they started arguing. I couldn't understand the words, but I knew they were fighting over who would have to ski behind me. My 3 teammates and I fell down so many times, taking the coastal rangers down with us like dominoes, that they respectfully moved us to the tail of the rope. If we could have videotaped our Seals on Ice show for America's Funniest Home Videos, we probably would have won. Because we were there as cadre to help train the young conscripts, the conscripts treated us like officers, cleaning and waxing our skis while we ate dinner. In the evening, if we left our boots outside the door, they'd clean and polish them before the next morning. The recruits would even clean our weapons for us. Another cool thing we did was learn how to make a snow cave. My coastal ranger counterpart stood tall and slim. He could effortlessly ski circles around me. We dug horizontally into the side of a snowdrift, up and horizontally inward, creating a plateau for the heat to rise to while the cold air dropped to the lower level. The coastal ranger and I put our packs in the entrance to block the wind and kept our ice axes inside, just in case we might have to dig ourselves out. From the plateau, we shaped the roof into a dome, so it wouldn't drip directly on us. We took off our overboots before entering the plateau area. With only 4 SEALs serving as cadre, my partner seemed honored to be paired up with me. He tried to clean off my boots. "No, it's okay, I'll take care of it," I said. He gave me a strange look. Later, he appreciated not having to be my servant. 1 or 2 candles were sufficient to heat the cave. Outside, the temperature was minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, I sat on a sleeping bag wearing just my navy blue polypro long undergarments. We didn't want to heat up the interior temperature much higher than 32 degrees, or our snow cave might unfreeze, start raining, and then collapse on top of us. The difference between the temperature outside and inside? 70 degrees made it feel like living in the Bahamas. The interior heat softened the walls and ceilings, so we patted them until they became hard again. After living in the same snow cave for 2 weeks, using it as a base to run ops from, we had patted the walls and ceilings so much that the interior space seemed on its way to becoming a snow house. The Swedes knew how to fight a war. Their rations included cognac and the best hot chocolate mix I'd ever had, plus meals like pasta bolognese with rye bread. To my amazement, my Swedish counterpart wanted to trade his rations for my MREs. Guess he got tired of the same meals all the time. We enjoyed eating each other's food in our snow cave. In fact, part of the fun training with foreign special ops units was the gear exchange. From the States, I had brought some big beef sticks, no spicy flavors, to slice up and put on my rations for extra energy in the cold weather. The Coastal Rangers loved the beef sticks. I had also brought a Zippo lighter, for which one of the Coastal Rangers traded his beautiful Laplander knife. It had a wooden handle with a slightly curved blade, plus a leather sheath that had 2 strands of rawhide string to tie it onto my pack. The Zippo lighter is more reliable in the cold than a butane lighter, but I liked the knife better. On the last day, my partner and I applied white face paint on the parts of our faces that naturally formed shadows, and gray on the prominent features, forehead, cheeks, nose, brow, and chin. All of us left our snow caves for the big op. Somewhere between 100 and 150 of us hooked up to the ropes behind our snowcats, which pulled us to our objective area. We skied in as far as we could, then removed our skis and backpacks inside the tree line, 300 yards away from our objective. I put on my big, clunky NATO snowshoes. The Coastal Rangers had nice, small, composite metal snowshoes that they could run with. Wow, you guys are way more high-tech in winter warfare than we are. For a pair of them, I traded my old Swiss Army knife and the snapped leather holder I used to carry it on my belt. It was too bulky to carry in my pocket. One of the black plastic sides of my knife had broken off, but it still had tools: saw, fish scaler with hook remover, leather punch with threader, magnifying glass, long blade, short blade, scissors, small pliers, corkscrew, toothpick, and tweezers. One would think that because Sweden is closer to Switzerland than the United States is, a Swiss Army knife would be in less demand there, but not so. The Coastal Ranger even threw in a bottle of schnapps to go with the snowshoes. He was so happy he practically worshipped me for making the trade. Then the Coastal Ranger went and told all his buddies. They chewed him out for taking advantage of me. If he'd brought those snowshoes when I was doing winter warfare in Alaska, I would have traded 5 Swiss Army knives. When I returned to the U.S., I would buy a new one. We patrolled forward in a wedge formation with a man in the middle and a wing on each side. Another element approached the objective area from the left flank. Shooting blanks, the left flank and our front wedge simultaneously assaulted through a mock fortification of 10 buildings. Normally, the basic SEAL unit is made up of a boat crew, only 7 or 8 men. In this company-sized assault of over 100 soldiers, we just had to go with the flow. The Swedish Coastal Rangers and other Northern European units, such as Norway's Navy Rangers, spend more time on skis and operating in the winter environment than Americans do, giving them a distinct advantage. However, America's technology helps level the playing field. It doesn't matter how good you are on those skis if I can catch you in my night vision scope from 400 yards away. Ski on that. I heard that while I'd been away training in Sweden, Laura had been out until late most nights partying hard with some other SEAL wives. When I asked her about it, she said, "Oh, it was only 1 or 2 times. I just got bored." I took her word for it because I believed her. I didn't want to believe anything else. We went to church on Sundays and everything seemed okay. My son, Blake, really liked hanging out with the SEAL team guys, and they loved him too. Especially after a particular incident when Blake was 4 years old. One day after work, I returned home to find Laura in the kitchen, out of her mind. "What's going on?" I asked. "Little Debbie was over, and they got into Blake's wading pool, naked." Little Debbie was a neighbor's 6-year-old daughter. "Oh." I called her mama and told her. She thought it was funny. "You better talk to him." So I walked down the hall to his room. Blake was playing Duck Hunt on the Nintendo, shooting flying ducks with his Nintendo Zapper light gun. "Hey, buddy, how was your day?" "Good," he said. "What did you do today?" "Played." I left him to his game and returned to Laura in the kitchen. "He's fine. Didn't even bring it up. Must not be such a big deal." "Oh, no. You have to make him talk about it. He's probably traumatized." So I returned to Blake's room. A dog on the TV monitor sniffed out the dead ducks in the grass and congratulated Blake. I became more direct with my questioning. "Did you go swimming today?" "Yep." "Well, did anyone go swimming with you?" "Yep, Debbie went swimming with me." "Did you and Debbie take y'all's clothes off while you were in the wading pool?" "Debbie took her bathing suit off and told me to take my bathing suit off." "Do you know you're not supposed to let people see your pee-pee?" "Yes, Mom told me not to let people see my pee-pee." "Well, did Debbie see your pee-pee?" "Yep, Debbie saw my pee-pee." He laughed. "Did you see Debbie's pee-pee?" He stopped playing his game and put down the gun. There was a hint of concern in his voice. "You know what, Dad? Debbie doesn't have a pee-pee." He seemed to feel sorry for her. "She's got a front butt." It was all I could do to keep from laughing my head off. I called up Smudge and he nearly busted a gut. The next day in the afternoon, Blake joined me in the SEAL Team 2 Foxtrot Platoon Ready room. We started talking about the front butt story and everyone cracked up. Years later, one of the guys would say, "Hey, you know what? I think I'm going to head out into town tonight and try to find me a little front butt." My son had become a team legend. While I was at SEAL Team 2, my Uncle Carol died of a heart attack while fishing. My heart ached as I returned home for the funeral at the First Baptist Church, the same church where I had beaten the crap out of Timmy so many years earlier. Relatives, friends, and people I didn't know packed the inside of the church. At the front, Uncle Carol lay in his casket. He had loved me, spent time with me, and helped me grow up to be a young man. The memorial service was a blur to me. Hymns, prayers, readings from the Bible, words from Brother Ron, and a eulogy. Sitting on the pew, I just physically couldn't take it. I rose to my feet and walked outside the front door of the church. I stood on the steps and cried, shaking uncontrollably. It was the hardest I had ever cried. Someone put his arms around me and hugged me. I looked up expecting to see Brother Ron, but the man with his arms around me wasn't Brother Ron. He was Dad. It was only our second hug, not like the forced one before I got on the bus for college. "You know, Howard, I'm going to miss him too. He always took the time with you because he was better at training you than I was. He had more patience. That's why Uncle Carol always did that with you." Later, I pulled myself together and followed the funeral procession to the cemetery where Uncle Carol was laid to rest. On June 6th, 1990, my daughter Rachel was born at a civilian hospital in Virginia Beach. My mother-in-law had arrived from South Georgia. I'd been up at Fort A.P. Hill, Virginia, one of the largest live fire ranges on the East Coast. I drove 140 miles southeast to see Laura and my baby girl. Seeing Rachel made me extremely happy. Even so, as much as I loved her, part of me was preoccupied with the team. Maybe some SEALs can balance God, family, and the teams. I couldn't. The teams were everything. After staying at the hospital for a day or two, I was gone again. Whenever I returned home, she was Daddy's girl. She loved to be with me, and I loved being with her. Once, when she got older, Blake pushed her off the back deck. "Blake, go in the closet and get a belt." He disappeared into the closet, then emerged with my biggest leather belt. "Son, why'd you bring the biggest belt you could find?" He looked in my eyes. "Dad, that was a bad thing I did, so I figured I deserved to get spanked with this big belt." Maybe he was just playing me. Anyway, I didn't spank him that time. Or any time after. If anything, I was too lenient with Blake. I could probably count the number of times on one hand that I'd laid him on the bed and spanked him with a belt. I let Rachel get away with more than Blake. She was my sweetheart and he was my buddy. I continued to hear more about SEAL Team 6, the secret counter-terrorist unit. Guys said the Team 6 was the team to go to. 6 was the Tier 1 unit, recruiting only the best SEALs, like the Pro Bowl of the National Football League. They did hostage rescue and got all the money. Operators went to whatever schools they wanted. Spend thousands of dollars to go to a 2-week driving academy? No problem. Want to go to Bill Rogers' shooting academy? Again? No problem. They used top-of-the-line equipment. They got all the support. An entire helicopter squadron was dedicated to them. It was a no-brainer. I wanted to go to SEAL Team 6. As things turned out, I would go to war first.
And that was Chapter 6, SEAL Team 2, from the book SEAL Team 6, Memoirs of an Elite Navy SEAL Sniper by Howard-Wasdin. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.